they pulled it off the market and said, we're going to make do, but it is not in the same shape as the Arden Hills, because Arden Hills, I think, has also some ADA issues that I feel that we cannot step aside from the ADA issues. I think if we believe in accessibility, it can't just be computer accessibility, it has to be physical accessibility. And that needs to be done. And again, to add that to this would be good money, and then you're this. I think that also one other thing is that if I recall, and I must confess, I stay pretty much in Ramsey County. I rarely go too far away. And in New Brighton, if I recall correctly, and Jan, I believe you and I chatted about this, is that the area where the Family Service Center is offers an absolute new option. Adding the library there. Actually, they already have people that are already coming to the Family Center. That then it makes this library way more accessible to some of the people that have not been using the library. And I think that's a critical mass of individuals that could be very well served by this. And this body has been on record of repeatedly saying to Met Council and to MnDOT that we need those bus routes constantly on the north-south as well as the east-west to make sure that anybody can get to someplace with walking hopefully less than a quarter of a mile to get there. So I just think that all of this is going to come back to us. If the budget all of a sudden turns into $2.5 million, then we're going to be back looking at looking at different structures. But if I believe this is a conservative estimate, meaning when I say conservative, is that you sort of thought what it's going to cost you and sort of have enough money to actually meet it. So when I say conservative, it's like you do the worst case scenario of how much you're going to need, but you have the best case scenario of how much money you're going to bring in to do it. So I just think that I can support this going forward, provided that the commissioners get that RFP before it just comes back to select someone so that we know exactly what is being looked at, because we only have the sketchy things and not the details of what's going to go in there.
Okay. If it's acceptable to the board, then I would like to call upon its... Oh, sorry.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
excuse me.
Commissioner Ortega.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bennett brought up the issue of parking. I'd like to know what the capacity of parking is.
Is the Susan Nemitz? Susan, if you could come up.
Commissioners, I am Susan Nemitz. I'm the director of the Ramsey County Library, and I have so many numbers in my head right now. I just want to make sure I get it correctly. It's on the second page under the executive summary. There are currently 239 parking spots, and what we've created is a secondary proposal that could add an additional 91 spaces for $160,000. That $160,000 is included in the total cost of the project right now. And again, what we'd like to do is open the facility for a year and really determine if that additional parking is necessary.
So there'll be 200 spaces dedicated to the library?
It is for the community center and the library's use. Right now we have about 40 spots at the Arden Hills Public Library, and that is more than adequate for the patronage that we get on a daily basis.
So
These would be shared spots.
Go ahead.
So has your study looked at the availability of spots during peak library hours to make sure that out of those 200 plus,
We had HGA, an architectural firm, do a parking study. They looked at the hours of the day that the libraries used, the hours of the day that the community centers used. We feel like the parking lot may be strained during the winter months on Saturdays, which is a very limited time period, and that's why we created a Plan B around parking. The truth of the matter, though, is a lot of the community centers' use is at different times of the day and evening, because they do large events in the evenings, than the prime library hour times. But again, we felt, because there were so many concerns, that we should create a solution if it proves out that the parking is inadequate.
Madam Chair, just one last question. So if we had to expand, there is that's a real possibility. Do we have property that's already part of that?
Commissioner Ortega, we worked with the city and the city engineers as well as the HGA architects. We identified a piece of property that could be used as the parking facility, and the city is on board and did the cost estimate in terms of adding the parking to the current facility.
So is the cost of that extra parking, the purchase of the property is included?
Commissioner Ortega, the city currently owns the property.
Owns the property, okay. And so would they be donating it? Just because they own it doesn't mean that it doesn't going to cost us anything.
Commissioner Ortega, we haven't finalized the lease, but in all conversations, we've talked about joint use parking, and so it would fund the paving of the surface area, but the city has not discussed any payment for that because their patrons would use it as well.
Commissioner Bennett on this point.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Ortega, my concern is that the way it's laid out, the building is a long building with parking on three sides of it. The additional new parking would go between the building and the street, take up most of the open space between the building and the street, as I saw the drawings. None of that property is within 100 feet or 200 feet of the library. The space that is right next to the library, if in your contracts, and I think this should be in here, that some of those spaces should be dedicated to the library, at least for handicapped and some of the elderly people that come in there, right next to the door where the library will be, which is on the back side of the building. Without a dedicated space, that space fills up with employees, and especially on Saturdays, you're absolutely right, especially in the afternoon after school hours and before, as people come home, because that's when they try to find areas for their kids where they can go and take them. That lot's pretty full. So there's a problem on parking there.
So just a quick follow-up.
Without some lots of spaces dedicated.
And Commissioner Redmond brought up this point with the disabled sort of infrastructure. So I am to assume that if this space is remodeled and made ADA, that I could assume that the same goes for the parking spaces. That they're going to have to be clearly
Commissioner
spaces
Ortega,
within,
the facility actually
50
has
feet.
3 entrances on the east, west, and south sides of the building. My assumption would be that there would be handicapped spots at each entrance, and I'm sure that's city code, at least it has been in terms of every library we've built in the last several years. The library's entrance would be on the east side.
So would they be, I think the question that I heard anyhow from Commissioner Bennett is, would they be also dedicated to the library because of that entrance? Is that a possibility?
Commissioner Reinhardt, I would love to have a conversation about this with the city. The one thing I just want to caution is that the library is open 35 hours a week, and the community center is open 100 hours a week. And so I just want to make sure that is a good use of the parking spaces.
Okay, so the possibility of during library hours that being dedicated, that there could be a discussion about that, is what I'm hearing.
Madam Chair, I think it's more than a discussion. I'm just saying that this is very important about the ADA and it being accessible. I mean, this is not negotiable. You can't not have spots, you know, around the block when the entrance is on the other side of the building.
Okay, when the plan, if this passes and the plan comes back to us, I think that absolutely then must be addressed.
Madam Chair, you stated it right. Dedicated spots, at least when the library is open. Because, and how you're going to enforce it is going to be a difficult situation, because somebody walks in and goes to a party right next door.
But then you make it 100%. The point is, it's important. It's not a negotiable right.
Well, and quite frankly, that problem exists wherever you go. So the enforcement is an issue. Commissioner McDonough?
I was just going to comment on that dedicated piece. I mean, it's critical to have the appropriate number of handicap parking spots at all the entrances. I think that's not the issue. I mean, this whole issue of whether there's actual spots dedicated for library patrons, I mean, we have joint use facilities all over, and they're joint use facilities. I mean, North St. Paul's a joint use facility. There's multiple things, and I don't think that we've ever heard that there's an issue about, you know, this spot's a library spot, this spot's a community center spot, this spot's this. I've been to the New Brighton Family Service Center. I mean, there's multiple activities going on in that building, multiple services going on. You know, I don't think that we want to go down the road of saying this spot's a library spot and have it sit vacant for 70 hours of the building being open and only available for 35 hours. Just doesn't make sense to me. Making sure that there's the appropriate number of handicap spots, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that just happens.
Okay. What I would like to do at this point is, it's my understanding that City Council Member Holmes and Mayor Jacobson would like to address the county board. So if Council Member Holmes from Arden Hills.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yes. And again, since this isn't really a public hearing, if you could limit your comments to just a couple of minutes. Welcome.
Okay. Yes, I will certainly limit my comments. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners.
You don't need to move those.
Sorry. Don't want to shout. I'm Fran Holmes with the Arden Hills City Council, and I have been focused on this for quite a while. I understand, as elected officials, what you're looking at, as the chairwoman said, you're looking at the economics of the situation. So I'm not going to go into the emotions and small libraries and how Arden Hills loves our libraries. We're going to go, I want to talk about the economics, the cost-benefit analysis. I want to echo some of the things that Representative Bennett has told us. First of all, I want to emphasize that you are, as you know, you represent all of Ramsey County. You represent the people of Ramsey County. You are the elected officials accountable to the people of Ramsey County. And as such, you need to consider the economics of the situation. You need to consider the cost-benefit analysis. And quite frankly, there's been a lot of discussion of this facility, but I don't believe that the cost-benefit and the economics and the numbers have been thoroughly vetted. We have finally gotten, and we've asked for these numbers over and over again, we finally did get in July the cost to compare the build-out of the Arden Hills Library and the New Brighton facility, as well as the Presbyterian homes. We did get the cost of the build-out, but we've never received accurate, that I felt, at least I have never received accurate numbers as far as what are the operating costs. What is the comparison of the operating costs of the New Brighton facility and the Arden Hills facility? Because quite frankly, I think the Arden Hills facility should be continued and considered continuing on, at least for a certain number of years. So we don't have a comparison of that. And I know as elected officials, it's very hard to make decisions. I face them as well. And sometimes you need a crystal ball to make decisions for the future. But one thing I think we need to focus on, and you need to focus on as representatives of the entire Ramsey County, is if you spend $1.5 million on this building in 20 years, the lease is for 20 years, after 20 years, you have nothing. You spent $1.5 million, and there is nothing, because the $1.5 million is to do improvements to the facility, and those improvements are, that facility is not only